Our speaker today is Hans Krauklis, Energy Resources in Mexico. Originally from Germany, Hans Krauklis has lived for over 50 years in Canada. He worked for the federal government as an economist concerned with industrial and trade strategies. He has an interest in energy and ecological issues, having installed a solar water heater as early as 1980 and later solar panels on the motorhome. Since retirement, Hans and Erica have spent most winters in Mexico and now live in La Floresta. The presentation will focus on two topics: the energy situation in Mexico and practical things we can do to make greater use of abundant solar energy in our area and to use energy more efficiently. Mr. Krauklis.
Thank you, Margaret. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Oh, good, wonderful. Well, as Margaret mentioned, I worked as an economist, and economists are, among other things, concerned with cost-benefit. You know, does the benefit outweigh the cost? And when we talk about energy, we find that under the current situation in the world, the production of oil, of petroleum, has reached what is called peak oil. Is everybody familiar with that term? Yes. Well, anyway, I just will quickly explain it. Production of petroleum has been going up over the decades and worldwide until fairly recently. And now it's more or less at a plateau. And as the cheaper sources of petroleum are exhausted, production will go down unless new deposits are found. And the problem with the new deposits is that they tend to be either in deep water in the oceans or in other environmentally delicate areas. So the cost of exploiting them goes up, and the environmental risk of damage also goes up. So we have to consider that the energy costs basically will rise, especially those of fossil fuels. The other elements to consider are the possible environmental damage. Climate scientists have been warning us now for decades about the effects of greenhouse gases emitted by the burning of fossil fuels. But I don't want to really say too much about the topic. Everybody is very familiar with it. Now, closer to home, we should be concerned about two other aspects, and that is the availability of fuel. As supplies shrink, cost goes up, and not everybody can afford it. And in the case of Mexico especially, oil production is a very important revenue for the federal government in Mexico. It used to be in the last few decades that Pemex would provide something like 40% of the revenue of the federal Mexican government. It may be down to maybe 25%, but still substantial. And as production shrinks, the feds in Mexico City will have to find new sources of revenue, and you can imagine where that will come from. I'll give you a few statistics. I'll try to keep it fairly general. The world oil production is about 80 million barrels a day. And Mexico's production of petroleum peaked in 2004 at about 3.7 million barrels a day. and it has declined now by at least a third. It may be somewhere between 2 and 2.5 million barrels a day. And compare this to the output of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia produces about 4 times what Mexico is producing now, 4 or 5 times. The United States produces about 3 times what Mexico is producing, but the United States is using about 8 times of what Mexico produces. And the United States output peaked in 1970, and what was the next thing that happened? In 1973, the Arab started an oil embargo because suddenly the United States was vulnerable. And so oil becomes a weapon as well. Now, in the case of Mexico, the proven oil reserves are down to less than 10 billion barrels, which means at current rates of production, they would last another 4 years or so. But of course, production will go down, and so it will be stretched out a bit. Now, the thing is, of course, there is more petroleum to be found in the deeper waters of the Gulf of Mexico. And some estimates are as high as 30 billion barrels, which might be 30 years worth of at current level of production. But there are technical difficulties, and it costs a lot of money, a lot of capital to develop these deposits. And it takes a fairly long time for them to come on stream. And as you probably know, Pemex is owned by the government of Mexico. In fact, the Lázaro Cárdenas government back in 1938 nationalized the oil industry in Mexico, and ever since it has been sort of untouchable. It's even written into the Mexican constitution that it must remain nationalized. So therefore, the government and Pemex find themselves sort of in a quandary on how to allow foreign technical expertise into this area. But you know, if they want to keep the gushers going, they have to do something. Now, you will probably also have heard about the huge potential deposits in the Chincotepec Paleo Canal, as this geological feature is called. That is the area around Poza Rica in Veracruz state. And that also has huge deposits of, probable recoverable reserves are roughly twice of what is easily recovered with current technology. But those deposits, which have been known since the 1920s, are extremely, extremely difficult and expensive to mine. The estimates are that you would need something like 20,000 wells because the oil is in small pockets here and there, and you may have to do horizontal drilling. And again, it's technically very, very difficult. So, and actually, Pemex has spent several $1 billion to develop these deposits, and after all the effort, Chicontepec produces about 1% of the current production. Very little. Now, I should also mention the current deposits are mainly in the Gulf of Campeche in the Gulf of Mexico, and the various fields are really dwarfed by one huge field. It's called Cantarell, and that, after recently, produced something like 60% of the total Mexican output. And for the last 10 years or so, it produced it only with the help of huge injections of nitrogen to keep the oil flowing. And the problem with all these injection procedures is that sooner or later, it just turns off. Suddenly it doesn't work anymore. So, who knows? Just to scare you a little bit. Now, along with the petroleum, there's also natural gas. And Mexico produces about 60% of the natural gas it uses. The population is growing, there's more industry, so demand has been going up. So now the remainder is being imported. There's one liquid natural gas terminal in operation, and another one is being built at Manzanillo. You may have seen the pipes lying along one of the highways there, which is supposed to bring the gas up from Manzanillo to Guadalajara. However, in the United States, there's now suddenly a surplus of natural gas because of a new technology to shutter the shale deposits in Montana and other areas east of the Rockies. And so the estimates are there's enough natural gas for the next 50, 60 years at current rates of consumption. And so that gas is actually cheaper at the moment than the imported natural gas from Indonesia or Australia even, or Sakhalin in the Russian Far East. So Mexico is going slow on the LNG and importing more from the United States. Now, Mexico has been exporting petroleum mainly to the United States, and that's down to about 1 million barrels a day. But these are not net exports, because at the same time, Mexico has to import certain quantities of very light crude petroleum. The Mexican petroleum is fairly heavy petroleum to use in the refineries to make gasoline. And the refineries don't really have the capacity to produce all the gasoline that's being used, so about half of the gasoline is imported to the United States. So Mexico is exporting 1 million barrels a day, and it's importing half the amount in finished gasoline. So there's a lot of trade, but that's how it goes. Talking about gasoline, as you know, in the United States and Canada and some other countries, the trend is towards more gasohol. In other words, mixing ethanol, usually 10% with 90% gasoline, and it has some good effects. It cuts pollution a bit, and it also increases the octane rating of the gasoline. The negative thing is that, especially in the case of the United States, the farming lobby has succeeded to get subsidies to convert maize, which is a food, or corn if you wish, into ethanol. And in Mexico, the Mexican Congress looked at that and said, no, we won't do that. That's not a good way of using food. However, by the same time, Brazil has done a huge project of converting sugarcane to alcohol, and they have, I don't know how many million acres they have under sugarcane just for that purpose. And of course, there's a fairly large sugarcane industry in Mexico, producing about 5 million tons a year. And Mexicans like sweet food, as you know. And maybe it's a good idea to divert a little bit of that and make ethanol to produce gasohol that can be used in the big urban areas to cut pollution a little bit. And actually that is planned, or maybe even being done. Apparently there are 3 ethanol plants under construction in Sinaloa State, and so we'll see what happens there. But again, this is only a small marginal supply given the huge demand that we have. Now, Pemex is on a fairly short leash by the federal government because Pemex has been a cash cow, as I mentioned. And so they will need a lot of funds and permission to develop these potential oil fields. Pemex, among other things, runs 453 pipelines with a total of 4,500 kilometers. That's for the petroleum, and about 9,000 kilometers of gas pipelines. I mean, they're interconnected with the United States to get that gas down here and so on. Excuse me. Now, most of the petroleum and gas is being used for transportation needs. And then the other huge energy source is electricity. And Mexico has a total generating capacity of about 52 billion watts. I should translate all that into kilowatts because in our households we use something like, on average, 10 kilowatts a day to run our fridges and the lamps and computers and TV sets and whatever. And the 52 billion watts of capacity, that would be 52 million kilowatts, okay? And if you have plants running day and night, you can produce a lot of power with it, okay? Now the effective capacity is somewhat lower, it's about 39 gigawatts. And the way the electricity, how time is running. The way the electricity system is running, you have base load and that's a minimum, and then you have peak load because demand goes up and down. And therefore you need to manage the electricity grid. It's a very intricate procedure. You need to be able to follow the load, to be able to switch on, switch off, or ramp up and down the various power stations. So that's very very complicated. But again, that's being done everywhere. Now, I think we have to go a bit faster here. It's amazing what time is running. For electricity generation, fossil fuels in Mexico account for about 3/4 of electricity generation, and renewable energy, which is hydropower, geothermal, and wind only a little bit, accounts for 23%, and the remainder is provided by the one nuclear power station at Laguna Verde, north of Veracruz. And so, in terms of the fossil fuel being used for those 75%, about half of that is now gas-fired. And gas is actually the most efficient way of producing electricity if gas is cheap, and it is for now. And on the other hand, of course, this country is just blessed with sunshine. And solar power is a fantastic source of energy. Could you imagine the whole of the power needs, electricity and other energy, could be provided by the solar power that impacts an area of the lake of Lake Chapala, all of Mexico. The only thing is how do you harvest this energy? Now, wind is also a fantastic source in some areas. In the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, where the mountains on the one side, central Mexico, and the mountains from Central America, leave a big valley, the wind is blowing almost constantly. We've had ourselves an experience there when we were driving to Tehuantepec from Chiapas. The wind from the side was so strong, it started unfurling our awning on the RV, and you can't really stop anywhere because the roads are narrow. That was very scary. So yes, there's lots of wind power there. There are also 4 sites being used of geothermal power in Mexico. That's also a very promising development. Now, because time is running, I could talk much more about this. So anyway, getting back to solar, what we can do. First of all, we have to talk about the Federal Electricity Commission, the CFE, and their tariffs. If you look at your own electricity bill, you will find that you are under tariff 1, okay? And there you have the 3 levels of charges, you know, for the first 150 kilowatt hours in 2 months, it's 0.7 pesos, and the next 100, it's 1.2 pesos, and then up to 200, well, beyond that, it's about 2.5 or something like pesos, okay? But, and that's a big but, and you know, we have only been learning about recently, not having lived here that long. The thing is, if we exceed 250 kilowatt hours per month over a 12-month period, and it's a moving average, you know, 12-month period, then we are suddenly put into the category of the high consumption domestic tariff, and that runs at about, including the taxes, about 4 pesos these days. And the other thing you will have seen on your bill is they always tell you our production cost, our cost of giving you the electricity is about 3.5 pesos if you divide the number there by the kilowatt hours, okay? And that is then, you're going to be charged we are going to be charged a full tariff if our consumption exceeds this 250 kilowatt limit. And so what can we do? Well, we can install solar panels for one thing. And what happens here is that there are 2 ways of doing it. You can either have a system that's completely independent of the CFE grid, which means you would need battery backup, and you would probably need a generator, you know, a gasoline generator for days like these. Or else you can just have a system whereby you have solar panels, and it's going to rain a little bit, solar panels and a huge inverter that takes the direct current from the solar panels and converts it to the alternating power. And you have to make a contract, or let's say your provider of the solar panels will make an arrangement with the CFE to install a bidirectional electricity meter, so that in times of surplus you can feed in electricity into the grid, and you get credit for it. Your meter will be running backwards, and then on a day like this, when you need power from the grid, it will go like usual. So that way you can avoid the high tariff. Yeah. Now, that is basically the photovoltaic system. The amount of room it takes is for the capacity of 1 kilowatt, you would need about 10 square meters of roof surface, okay? And 1 kilowatt would produce, on average, 5 kilowatt hours a day, because the sun is shining for, let's say, 8 hours, but in the morning and in the late evening, it's not that effective. But you know, it's after you've bought the panels and the inverter, it's basically free energy for 20 years or maybe even longer. You know? Now, the other ways of using solar power is naturally hot water. As Margaret mentioned in the introduction, thank you. You promised and you did it. Wonderful. Yes, yes. Even back in the 80s, after the second oil crisis, the Canadian government offered subsidies to buy solar thermal panels. And so we installed a solar hot water heater, and we had a tank in the basement with a heat exchanger, and so we would preheat our water. And you can get the same systems here, and they're very effective, and they're fairly cheap. And then, not to forget something that costs you virtually nothing, a solar cloth dryer. You know what that is? A solar clothes dryer. Yes, a clothesline, yes. That's all it takes. Okay, well, so that's basically what we can do fairly easily. All the facilities are available for any of these options, okay? Right here in Ajijic. And let's talk about, we live in Mexico, and we should be grateful to the Mexicans for their hospitality, and maybe we can even give something back. So there are a number of things that can be done. For example, it is actually quite useful to have a solar stove. There are various models available, and you can build your own for that matter. For example, you could just have a metal box with a glass cover, tempered glass hopefully, and you can cook your rice in there in 35 or 40 minutes if the sun is shining. That's all you need. Or else you can have a parabolic mirror, we can turn this around and put the solar stove right here and have the sun's rays just meet focus exactly. And that is also fairly easily done and very effective. And there are still many people in Mexico, in the rural areas, and especially the Indians, Indian tribes. When we went to Chiapas, we saw these women and the children trudging miles and miles to find firewood. And every year it's further and further away because they're denuding the forest. Okay? And with a solar stove, they would need only maybe 1/4 of the firewood just for days like these. So that's one thing. And then the other big thing is production, using plants that grow in deserty areas, like jojoba and jatropha, to produce biodiesel or produce oil that can be used as biodiesel, or to light lamps, or to make soap. There are many uses. And that again is not capital intensive, but the danger is that when you have larger farms concerned, they will say, well, if you grow the stuff in the desert, it only produces 100 liters per hectare. If we have it in well-watered areas competing with other crops, we can do 3 or 4 or 5 times as much. Okay, so you have this food versus fuel argument. So this is just a very short introduction to this whole issue of energy in a country like Mexico, and then the specific problems in Mexico. And I hope that you find this of some use. Thank you so much. Marvelous. Thank you. Well,
you have questions.
Yes, you have questions. Well, you choose who puts the question.
Hans, 2 questions. There was an article in the Reporter some time ago, and also, I think I think at Costco, that a lot of the panels that you buy down here don't work in Mexico. And I can't remember why they said that. Something to do with what we use in the States is not the same as what we use down here.
Yeah.
Gotta think what the second question was now. Oh, I know. We had solar panels for our pool. They don't work. Do you have to have them then on a north-south thing? And how do you keep the dust off them to make them work?
Well, first of all, Lois, you're talking about the thermal panels, just to heat water.
Yeah.
Well, I guess they have to be exposed to the sun. So in other words, they have to be south-facing, and at a slight elevation, maybe 20 degrees. But that's not very critical, I think. And they should be working. I mean, if you just want to heat a pool, I mean, you could take just dark tubing, and it will produce hot water, I think.
I guess the question was, if it doesn't work on a pool, why would it work on a house?
If it doesn't work on a pool, why would it work in a house?
Why would it not work on the pool? That's the question.
God knows. Yeah, we have Canadian pans. Maybe that was the problem. But we had 5 and they guaranteed 90-degree weather, 90-degree temperature, and it doesn't work.
They're off. Anybody want to buy them?
Oh,
Well, I don't know, where, do we have a mic on this side? Or you're,
The cost benefit of the solar water heating, I can really see easily. We put that in. Actually, even with cloudy days, we have enough hot water for showers, even cloudy days yesterday. But I was talking about the cost benefit of photovoltaics. I mean, that's more of an investment in it for return. And what are your thoughts about that?
well, I have been given an estimate very recently, okay? So a 1 kilowatt system that would allow us to stay out of the high tariff, okay, would cost about $7,500. That is 6 solar panels. In other words, a bit more than 1 kilowatt of capacity, and the big inverter, and then there's the bidirectional meter would cost a couple of $100 as well. So $7,000 to $8,000, I would think. And it depends. It all depends on how you calculate things. If you're looking at the high tariff, in other words, the 4 pesos per kilowatt hour, and you have a certain usage, you can figure out how many years it would take to pay back as well. But if you need it, if you figure it's worthwhile, it's probably, I don't know, I could be wrong, 5-6 years or something like that. But the thing is this, the electricity rates in Mexico have been going up quite a bit, and especially the high rate, okay? I checked the figures for 2006 and 2011, the same months, because it varies by month, and it's been going up by 37%, and actually in the last 2 years, 2009 to 2011, it's been going up by about 25%.
Hi.
So if you extrapolate this out, you can figure that in 5 years you'll be paying 50% more again or something like that. And by installing a system like this, the sunk cost, no further problems, even maintenance is minimal. If you calculate this, then it becomes even a better investment.
Okay, am I close enough?
Sure.
As usual, I don't know what I'm talking about, but it doesn't seem to make sense to me that the solar heating is, in the future, will be developed house by house. Is there any work and is there any practicality of having like a solar system for a small town or a development? Rather than each one as a separate system, it seems to me that's much more practical and much more efficient. But usually I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question, but I think it's more relevant for United States, Canada, areas where you have heating needs. Here, we are lucky, and I must congratulate all of us.
Electricity.
Oh, electricity, I'll come to electricity
Small
then.
Mexican towns or,
Yes.
or regional developments, like, it seems that it develops power, and you can use power for anything.
Yeah, if you're talking about generating solar electricity, yes, in fact, there are some such solar generating stations in Spain, in the United States, California, for example. You have basically two types of systems. You can have photovoltaic, just like I explained in terms of our own roofs, or you also could have a thermal system, which is very much like this solar stove. For example, one system, you would have a central tower, and you would have meters, and they would focus on a container on central tower, and the temperature there can be about 400 degrees Celsius or something like that, okay? And you would then heat water, turn to steam, run steam turbines, and this is being done in some places. At the moment, it's still relatively expensive. In fact, I think we're slightly better off in terms of money with our roof installation. However, the thing is, yes, you could have, let's say, on 1 square kilometer, you can have a plant that would produce 50,000 kilowatts, put it this way, that would have a capacity, 50,000 kilowatts, but of course you only have 5 to 6 hours a day. However, you can also store the heat in salts, okay, or ceramic or something like that, and basically run all through the night. And of course, demand at night is lower anyway, so that's not bad. So outside of the rainy season, when you don't have clouds here, you could virtually run this kind of plant for 9 months a year. And in the cloudy season, you could combine it with natural gas. Natural gas, instead of the sun, could produce the steam and run this way. So you would have an integrated system. And this is actually a very possible system.
I have one here.
Here? Oh, okay. Hi. I spoke to you once before, and you mentioned a firm that you recommended in Guadalajara for installing photovoltaics.
I didn't speak, and I'm not supposed to recommend anybody.
Okay, afterwards.
Sorry.
I saw Jason here, so if you want to see him afterwards, you can see a local installer.
I have a couple of things. First of all, some comments. We have solar energy. We're net 4 kilowatt hours a day, so we're well under DAC. Our next door neighbor is heating their pool with solar energy, and the temperature the other day was 90. As far as the solar panels are concerned, in the dry season, you just have to hose them off every few weeks just to keep the dust out. My question, though, was I think you made reference to geothermal. We use geothermal in Canada for heating and cooling, so we're familiar with it. I wasn't sure how that would apply and to what it would apply in Mexico. Could you elaborate on that a bit?
Of course. Well, what we do in Canada is we're just trying to exploit the few degrees of temperature difference between the ground 5 or 6 or 8 feet down and the cold air in the winter. Okay, and you would basically heat the fluid, let's say antifreeze, and then run it through what do you call these things? Well, actually a heat pump. Okay? And in other words, if you were heating electrically, this kind of system would use only a fraction, maybe one quarter of the electricity you would use otherwise. In a volcanic country like Mexico, it's a completely different situation. Okay, if we drilled a hole in San Juan Cosola into the mountains where the hot water comes out, who knows? You might hit boiling water for all you know. And in fact, near Mexicali, there's a working plant, and they export the electricity to Los Angeles because in California, for example, the power utilities have to meet certain mandated renewable energy requirements. So okay. And there are some other places. We've been up near where the butterflies are. There's an area, it's Los Azufres in Michoacan, and they have a big geothermal power station there. There are a number of areas, where there's possible. But the thing is, you would actually have a huge amount of heat rather than this very marginal heat that you get in Canada.
Yeah, you talked about the natural gas production in the Northwest in the United States, the hydrofracking kind of approach. And there's a huge level of resistance now building. Can you speculate on this level of resistance by the citizens to this process and the damaging of the drinking water?
Well, I will only speculate. You just mentioned drinking water. That's exactly it. Because by fracturing the rocks, you may affect the water table and the aquifers, and that suddenly you open your tap and out comes not just water but bubbles and there's natural gas. Okay? I really can't say much more about it, but yes, there's an environmental issue there.
Thank you for your information. This gentleman spoke of developers. I think the biggest issue appears to be the people with money, M-O-N-E-Y, whether it's pesos, dollars, or whatever, they need to get involved. And as we know, there are some people who have a lot of money, who do have morals, and do have ethical values. And I think perhaps we are getting too much information and not enough go-go. And I think of the civil rights movement, and I also think of when I served on the park board in Minnetonka, Minnesota, developers were not allowed to develop the land without giving a certain percentage to parks. It was a requirement. It wasn't anything, it was a requirement. So it seems like there is, it's a lot simpler if there's just somebody who's got some push and some drive and says, and I think of Hector, who I picked up off the street. It needs to be young people. It needs to be the young people who know that there isn't going to be this energy there for their children and their grandchildren. But it makes me so angry to know that this is all here and it isn't being used.
Well, thank you. But I mentioned at the beginning, I'm an economist, okay? And unfortunately, we also have to look at capital requirements. And you see, the one problem is this. With, let's say, electricity generation, okay? If you are going to use that natural gas, let's say, you only need a fairly simple turbine. It's a fairly inexpensive, relatively inexpensive system to set up, okay? Whereas if you put up a solar power station, or with a tower and all the mirrors and so on, the capital cost is all up front, okay? Later on, the solar energy itself is basically free, but you need gobs and gobs of money, okay? And so it really boils down to where does the money come from, and of course, the government, wherever they are, they have a role to play because they're supposed to look to the future, although it's difficult for politicians to look beyond the next term, as I say. But even so. Yes, you need an energy policy, basically. And if you have an energy policy, yes, you can force developers or others to act in certain ways. But, yes.
There was an article that came out in either on the internet or Guadalajara Reporter about the Isthmus of Tehuantepec putting in a wind energy mast that would actually, they said, it would actually give enough energy, electrical energy, to fuel all of Mexico. Is this a sort of hearsay, or is this a reality or semi-reality?
It's a potential reality. Okay. In fact, there is a what we call wind farm there, okay? You have wind turbines, and these days the wind turbines are on towers 80 to 100 meters high, and they're huge turbines. The three wings, they rotate with an area of about 1 acre, huge, okay? I mean, just picture the big airplanes, the Boeing 747 and so on. I mean, that's about the length of these wings, okay? Huge. And when the wind is blowing, they produce gobs of energy. And when the wind is not blowing, you have none. And the problem with electricity is storage, okay? One way to store energy is to have a reservoir up there and a reservoir down here, and then when you have excess electricity, you pump the water up. When you need electricity, you let it run down and produce power. You may have it in some areas, okay, but for example in Holland you couldn't do it because it's flat, okay. In Mexico there are areas where you can do it. And yes, as I mentioned, when we drove through the area, the wind was blowing, and apparently, compared, let's say, to Ontario, the Great Lakes region, okay, the wind in the Tehuantepec Isthmus region is much more dependable. It's about twice as dependable as, let's say, in Ontario. And yeah, it makes sense. In fact, there is a wind farm now, but it's a little bit small. But of course, there are always big plans for more and more and more. The one other problem is that wind may be blowing well in an area which is far from population centers, so you don't have transmission lines. To build transmission lines is fairly expensive too. You have to add this as well. Okay. But yes, it makes for a great power source if you can take into account the interests of the local residents, because these things also have negative environmental effects. They do. And if you have backup, you need backup. Okay? It can be either these gas-powered power stations which can react very quickly to the ups and downs in the wind, okay? Or you can pump water or something like that. Okay? But that's a big issue as well.
We have time for one last question in the back there.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Jason Mills with, we have a local solar company here in Ajijic called eSun Energy. Many of you might know us already. In fact, what I want to do, because I have seen quite a few folks here that I know that have solar power. So how many people here, if you have either solar hot water for your swimming pool, for your domestic use, or electricity, please raise your hand or stand up.
Stand up.
Wow. This is something that I really wanted everybody to see, because this area is interesting enough. We've been working in the area for over 4 years. I believe that this lakeside area has one of the highest concentrations per capita of solar use in Mexico. So there are a lot of people doing it. We're helping, and I really appreciate your inspiration of getting others to get out there and do something about it, because with all the energy problems that we have, the environmental problems we have, there are solutions. There are solutions available. So thank you so much, and if anybody has any questions, feel free to talk to the people who raised their hands or to me. And I'm sorry to hear about your issue. It's probably a case of somebody sold you something that they didn't know what they were doing and designing, it sounds like. So make sure you're working with a reputable company and a salesperson who really knows what they're doing as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But we don't know any of those, do we?
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. We've run out of time. Next week, our presenter will be Mitchell Percy, hypnosis, drug-free pain management. So now it's time to pick up your coffee cups and stack the chairs by color and style. Thank you for coming, and we hope to see you next Sunday. Plus, pick up any Mexicans you find on the street and bring them.